We've been here before, haven't we? It's a rebrand of the Rwanda scheme. He will come up against loads of human rights arguments which will block the transfer of prisoners to other countries. You need to look at the jurisdiction. Who's going to supervise prisoners in a foreign country when they're serving a sentence under the British criminal justice system? He's going to come up against a whole host of issues and legal challenges, and this will drag on for years and years, and he won't actually send anybody abroad at all.
The problems surrounding our prison estate and the treatment of convicted criminals are likely to deepen in the coming months. The Times reports that thousands of probation staff are contemplating strike action before the end of the year, raising questions about how the system could possibly cope as and when the government's early release plan comes into force. This morning, Nigel Farage and his Reform colleagues outlined their own response to prison overcrowding, deporting all 10,000 of the foreign nationals currently being held in British jails. They say they would do it within months of taking power. Prisoners would be returned to their country of origin or sent to third countries like El Salvador or Kosovo, who would be paid to detain them on the understanding that those prisoners would never be returned to the UK. To discuss all of this, I'm now joined by Mark Fairhurst, who's the National Chair of the Prison Officers Association. Mark, welcome to the Times at One. I want to begin with what is happening inside England and Wales's prisons right now. How urgent, in your view, is the new need to reduce numbers of prisoners and do it very quickly?
Yes, good afternoon. So there is an urgent need to reduce the prison population to satisfy the huge court backlog, so we have enough space to cater for the most serious offenders. But in this particular case, the PC Harper case, I'm positive we could free up additional space and block anybody convicted of manslaughter from early release. You only have to look at the remand population. We're knocking on to some 17,000 people on remand. I'm sure we could get a couple of thousand of them bailed or tagged with the GPS tag to monitor them electronically. That's an easy win for this government, and I can't understand why you don't consider it.
That is very interesting. So just to be very clear about what you're saying, you are suggesting that if the government were, in order to deal with this particular problem over PC Harper's killers, if the government were to say that all those prisoners convicted of manslaughter would remain in prison, would not be subject to this early release plan, you're saying the prison system could cope with that, even if it meant 1,000 people who might have been early released won't be.
Well, what I'm saying is, if you look at a remand population knocking on to 17,000 prisoners, surely we can free up 1,000 remands and electronically tag them so they're monitored electronically in our communities. They can't all be, accused of a really serious crime that warrants a remand.
Let's talk about another aspect of this, which I suspect you have strong opinions about, and that is the safety of releasing thousands of prisoners early, when we now learn that the probation officers who will be responsible for supervising the prisoners once they are released, including supervising their tagging, their check-ins, their curfews, everything else, the probation service is facing a strike where thousands of probation officers are talking of walking out, or at least working to rule, before the end of the year. How big a problem would that be?
Well, I don't blame them, and I wish them all the best. I don't blame them for walking out. They've been treated absolutely appallingly. They're struggling to cope with current workloads, never mind us keeping an extra 5,000 offenders on the doorsteps over the next 10 months. So solidarity to them on that score. But I don't know how they're expected to monitor people. Have we even got enough ankle tags? Because the last time we went through this early release debacle, Sackur, who was responsible for tagging people, didn't even have enough tags. So there's a lot of issues involved in this early release scheme. There really are.
Yeah. I mean, your message to the government would be what? If you can't be sure that the probation service can cope, is able to cope, you shouldn't be even considering the early release plan.
Well, they have to do something, unfortunately, because of the state of affairs in our prisons. We can't cope with even more overcrowding, and we need to satisfy the courts. But there are options available to this government if they really want to delve down into the finer details. So look at the remand population, look at the open estate. We have about 1,000 low-risk offenders in the open estate who work in our communities, who go home on home leaves. They're not a risk to the public. Maybe we could release them immediately over the next couple of weeks, freeing up additional space there. And we have more monitoring tags available instead of remanding more people. Maybe we could look at that as well. So there are options available in the immediate future, but long term, without a doubt, we have to look at sentencing policy and who we actually send to prison who really don't need to be there.
Yeah, you in this conversation have highlighted what you think is the possibility of putting more people on remand into early release. The Reform Party, Nigel Farage and his colleagues this morning have made it clear that their plan is different. They are going to focus on getting foreign prisoners out of the prison system, deporting them. Now, if they won't be taken by their countries of origin, Farage says countries like El Salvador and Kosovo could be paid to take up to 10,000 foreign prisoners. What do you reckon to that?
Well, we've been here before, haven't we? It's a rebrand of the Rwanda scheme. He will come up against loads of human rights arguments which will block the transfer of prisoners to other countries. You need to look at the jurisdiction. Who's going to supervise prisoners in a foreign country when they're serving a sentence under the British criminal justice system? He's going to come up against a whole host of issues and legal challenges, and this will drag on for years and years, and he won't actually send anybody abroad at all.
Well, there are other European countries like Denmark, which in slightly different ways are considering sending foreign prisoners to, for example, Kosovo. I think 300 prison places are being offered by Kosovo to Denmark. But not only that, Nigel Farage says there's another thing we could do. We could very quickly build these so-called Nightingale prisons, that is, more sort of Portakabin-style prisons, which would deal with the urgency of this particular problem. It does feel like he's trying to come up with solutions to an intractable problem.
He is, but he doesn't realise the complexities and the finer details of stuff like that. So we've got temporary accommodation coming online all the time within the current prison estate. And if you wanted to set up a Nightingale prison, you're going to come up against planning objections from the local community. Nobody wants a prison on their doorstep. We're seeing that with these new build prisons as we speak. You're going to come up with the infrastructure. How do you increase the drainage in a system, log it onto the electricity network? There's all kinds of problems with a fast-track prison system where you build in someone's community who doesn't want it there. You've got the procurement system. Who's going to build these new prisons? You have to procure it and send it out to tender. That takes years. So there's a whole host of problems that practically he hasn't really thought of.
Mark Fairhurst, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on Times Radio. That's Mark Fairhurst, National Chair of the Prison Officers Association.